the 1994 Unsolved UFO Mysteries of Western Michigan with special guest Jack Bushong Jr. Episode 41 of the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. Welcome to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. Coming to you from the glacial dumping grounds known as the Michigan Basin. I'm Michelle.
And I am Wayne.
And we are a Michigan-based husband and wife educator and podcasting duo that after having a UFO sighting in March of 2018, have started to examine UFOs and other paranormal topics within Michigan and beyond.
Topics include UFOs, the paranormal, conspiracy theories, ghosts, alternative history and archaeology, cryptids, and all things strange and paranormal. So sit back, grab a drink, and come along with us on this journey down the paranormal rabbit hole. All right, everybody. How's everything going?
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to episode 41 on October 29th, 2022. And oh my God, do we have an episode for you.
Feeling a little starstruck right now.
Just a little bit, because tonight we have on the podcast Jack Bushong Jr. He was the National Weather Service radar operator during the March 8th, 1994 Western Michigan UFO incident.
This is also our guy who was featured on Unsolved Mysteries Season 3, Episode 2 of the episode Something in the Sky on Netflix. This was such a great conversation. We were talking for about 45 minutes before we even started recording, just finding so many similarities between Jack and Wayne. I mean, if this was a video podcast, everybody would be cracking up from the facial expressions I had going the whole time.
We have mutual interest in a lot of things, and it comes from our science backgrounds. Me being a earth and space science teacher, and one of the aspects of that is understanding weather and weather radar, reading weather maps, all that good stuff.
Both of you guys play flight sim.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
That was the topper. So when they could sit there and start talking about planes and flight paths on flight sim.
Yep.
It was
we
crazy.
both have a love for aviation, for sure. I mean, I grew up around aircraft. That's why our sighting bothered me so much, because of the thing we saw. There was no way in the hell that thing should have been floating in the sky like that. But everybody.
I'll tell you, if Jack's wife is listening, I swear you got a brother-in-law up here in the Metro Detroit area.
Okay. It's not pick on your husband day. But everybody, you need to get onto Netflix and watch that episode. It's called Something in the Sky, as Michelle said. It's season 3, episode 2 on Netflix, Unsolved Mysteries. So fantastic stuff. And we cannot thank Jack enough for spending the time with us that he did and letting us be one of the first podcasts to have him come on and talk to us and get into how everything worked with the radar, what they said to him, and how they kind of had moved him and gave him the hint to get out of Michigan so he could pursue his career further. And just an amazing background, amazing education and experience. So you're going to hear all of that kind of stuff in this interview.
It's the behind the scenes look.
Yeah, and
definitely.
This will probably be one of our longest podcasts to date. We talk about all kinds of stuff involving the incident on March 8th. A little bit of speculation is also involved in that, but plan on sitting down, having a few cups of coffee,
driving in your car, working a full shift.
Yeah, raking the leaves, whatever you got to do. Because it's a long podcast, but an awesome podcast full of information. And if this doesn't convince you that there is some kind of crafts flying around out there, I don't know what else will. Because here we're going to talk about the 300 eyewitnesses. We're going to talk about the police that were chasing these things through the and communicating through the 911 dispatcher to Jack at the National Weather Service in Muskegon operating that radar, and his sightings on the radar correlating with the eyewitness reports. So something was definitely going on here in Michigan.
Well, even in March 8th, 94, and 40 to 42 counties were reporting sightings that night. I even talked to my dad earlier tonight, and he was a huge fan of Larry King Live back in the day.
Yep.
And I asked him, I said, Dad, do you remember anything going on back in March of 94 with a bunch of sightings over the state of Michigan? And even though we always lived on the east side of the state, he remembered seeing everything on the news then, and even remembered, he was like, well, wasn't it on Larry King Live? I'm like, he remembers.
Yep, it certainly was. They even talked about it on that. And another thing I want to point out, when we read Jack's bio here in a few minutes, he was also featured on the History Channel show years ago. I want to say it was around 2008. He was on UFO Hunters. And it was season 2, episode 2, and that episode was called UFO Emergency, where they take the police tapes, the testimony, the radar information, and they put it all together, and they spell out what was going on. And it's just amazing. And here in Michigan, we have like the most sightings. What are we, always in the top 10 at least every year?
Yeah, Michigan is typically the top 10. So, we can draw on the speculations because we're a state surrounded by fresh water, and it's the largest bodies of fresh water on the planet. So
absolutely. And there's something to do with March, because as we go back in time for our news article tonight, you're going to find out what was going on later on in March on the other side of the state, on the east side, like in Flint.
That's why I tell Wayne I'm always confusing the dates in March. Our experience. Now, this experience, and I was 19 going on 20, and not paying attention to the news at the time.
Nope, there was other things going on. And this was also the year that Mount Pinatubo erupted and changed the whole climate of the planet, making it colder by about 2 degrees. So a lot of stuff was going on at the time. So we've got a lot to cover. We want to get everybody onto this interview as fast as we can. So let's go ahead and talk about where you can find our shows in other locations.
You can find us on YouTube. Search us out by typing in Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters Podcast. It's all one word, or you can also find the link in the show notes.
Yep. And if you have a story you would like to tell, we would like to talk to you. You can reach out to us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. Send us a brief summary of your experience, and we'll contact you to discuss things further and try to get you or your story on the podcast. And we do have a story for Communication Corner today. It's a short one, but it's a good one.
So, and our store is back online because, technology can be a blessing or a curse sometimes. If you like the podcast and would like to rock some of the latest swag, head on over to our online store, and you can find that link also in the show notes.
And then don't forget to check out our Patreon page if you would like to support the podcast there. It is patreon.com/MIUFOSPEP, where you can sign up. We can't wait to give you a shout out for all of your support. And speaking of shout outs, once again, we got our Patreon Ed S, who is supporting us incredibly. What an awesome contributor to the podcast.
Ed is a good dude.
And very good guy. And also we have Hava H. So once again, thank you for your support. And it's because of support from people like you that help us keep the podcast going. So once again, thank you very much. And this podcast is supported by contributions and goodwill to the podcast to help keep us going. So thank you all very, very much.
You can find all of these links that we've mentioned and more in the show notes. Just use the link tree to take you to any of the links.
And lastly, before we jump into our communication corner and letter for the episode, one thing I do want to let everybody know is that we are starting now a Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast live show that will be streamed on the weeks in between any episode releases. So next Saturday at 8 p.m., we will be going live to discuss this episode that we're releasing tonight and have a roundtable. So you can find us on YouTube and check it out and come in and join in, and we'll have an interactive conversation. So we're getting into the YouTube live.
It's like the before and after parties on StreamYard.
Exactly. So be looking for notifications on that happening, and get to our YouTube page and sign up, subscribe, and make sure you put on that notification bell so that when we release something new, you will get that notification. You can come join us. But now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to hand this over to Michelle for our communication corner with a letter we received from one of our listeners. Michelle, take it away.
So this is coming from Janine, and, she was so thankful to our Facebook group as far as giving her a space to be able to, share her record of what she witnessed mid-October of 2021. So from her viewpoint, I live on the west side of Detroit, to be precise. If anyone knows the area, I was headed west down a side street called Keeler. It was shortly after 9 p.m. and slightly raining. I kept hearing a loud noise, which sounded like an airplane. It was so loud that it was for sure about to crash. I stopped in the middle of the street, like a dummy, knowing as big as a plane is, I was pretty sure the tail wings, landing, gear nose, something was going to smash into me. Still, I sat and looked out the windshield. Nothing. Looked out the passenger window. Nothing. Soon as I turned to look out my driver's window, there it was. It was so black, but I quickly traced it with my eyes. Diamond-shaped with 3 white lights shining from the bottom. I thought it was about to crash because it was right above the treetop, damn near on somebody's house. Then before I could get out the words, it made a huge boom sound and disappeared in a blink. I've heard stories where people say they're usually quiet and things go haywire or stop working in their car, but none of that happened. That joker was super loud and low, which made me think a plane was crashing, and my radio and lights were still on. I drove the next 5 blocks home in silent tears and have been sky watching ever since. Did they see me?
Yeah. I wonder if by diamond she might mean a triangle.
Like she didn't see the back end.
Does that not sound familiar? That's crazy. I mean, there have been reports of the diamond-shaped crafts, but they have been kind of violent toward people if they are seen. So, man, crazy account, but awesome.
Well, the fact that she heard the loud noise, like the propulsion from it, like an airplane, but yet it's not an airplane because it's just kind of stationary and hovering there.
And the fact that it was making noise. That's the first time I've heard about one of these things making a lot of noise. So that's an interesting, different piece of evidence when it comes to these craft, whatever they are. And I'm sorry, we don't have anything that can just disappear in a blink of an eye like that. But just so everybody knows, this was sent to us. It was October 23rd, 2022 when she wrote us. And, amazing eyewitness account. So Janine, thank you very much for sending that in. We're glad that our Facebook group is providing you a little bit of a space to relay your information, and
who knows, maybe someone else from the west side of Detroit is listening and knows the area and was out that night too.
Yeah, if there's any other witnesses to corroborate her story, please email us at mi.ufo.podcast unsolved.podcast@gmail.com or sign up for our Facebook group and send us a message. Well, Michelle, after hearing that account, I'm hungry.
I want some chicken wings.
Some chicken wings with ranch.
Oh, yes, Azira's ranch.
Maybe some chili fries with some cheese sauce on there.
This guy's trying to give me heartburn.
It sounds like we need to go to our favorite place.
New Boston Coney and Grill.
That's right, New Boston Coney and Grill. Let's go.
Traveling near New Boston, Michigan? Hungry? Well then, you need to check out New Boston Coney and Grill tucked away at 37005 Huron River Drive. With daily specials, homemade soups and desserts, and a staff that makes you feel like family, you will not be disappointed. Give them a try for dine-in or carry-out at 734-606-5313. You can find their page, including their menu, on Facebook. Bon appetit! And we're back.
Hey, Michelle, I think it's that time.
It's time for What's in the News.
Let's go back in time and say, yes, what is in the news?
Flint youth, 14, reports sighting of UFO. This was printed March 15th of 1994. Similar reports bring researchers to state to determine if we really are not alone. Dennis Roberts, 14, was sitting in his yard one evening last week when suddenly he saw a giant, triangular-shaped object hovering above him. The piercing white and red lights on the front of the mysterious craft beamed through the dark sky. Frightened, he ran into his East Flint home and continued to watch the craft from his bathroom window. It just hovered there. It was so low, only about a half a mile above the house, then it just zoomed off. But it didn't sound like a jet, he said. It made a humming sound, and it was big as my whole street. Roberts spotted the UFO about 8:30 p.m. on March 10th, 2 days after people reported seeing a round-shaped aircraft with similar lights hovering above Muskegon. Residents, police officers, and even Muskegon's National Weather Service officials who saw blips on their radar screens, and we know who that is, confirmed the object's location. It was the weirdest thing I saw in my life, said Holly Graves of Holland, who ran to the window with her husband, Daryl, after their 14-year-old son screamed. And Holly is also in that episode of Unsolved Mysteries as well.
Absolutely.
Yep. Hovering just above tree level across the road was a huge rotating globe-shaped object with white and red lights. What we saw was not a whole craft, but the bottom of it turning in a clockwise motion, Holly Graves said. People might think we're nuts, but we're not. The Graves family called police, and a responding officer saw the lights in the distance and contacted the National Weather Service office. It in turn notified the Mutual UFO Network after picking up signals on radar. UFO researchers are descending on southwestern Michigan this week as reports continue to filter in from dozens of people who say they saw something unusual in the night sky March 8th from Grand Rapids to the Lake Michigan shoreline between Muskegon and South Haven.
And just one more time, everybody, this is an article that was printed on March 15th, 1994.
Yeah, so you figure a week after... let's see, the newspaper, was it in Muskegon, had gotten the 911 tapes on March 9th and decided then that it was going to go to print. So, yeah, they released that it was, for either 40 or 42 counties reporting. So it doesn't surprise me that here we are reading an article, from Flint.
And 300 reports, but we know that more than 300 people saw that craft on March 8th, or those crafts on March 8th. They just haven't reported them. 300 people were brave enough to make the reports, but there's probably a good couple thousand that saw something that night.
So this article went on to say, it is right now the hottest case we have in the country, said Walter Andrus, director of the Texas-based International Mutual UFO Network. Lee Lamberts, a sports editor for the Holland Sentinel, saw intense lights flying in a boomerang-shaped formation about the same time as the Graves family. So here's another witness account. The formation of lights stayed perfect, Lambert said. It sounded distinctly like one jet, but there were half a dozen lights, up to 10. Some reported the object or objects to be slow moving, but radar tracking showed it to move 10 miles in just 10 seconds. In Flint, Roberts excitedly told his mother, Terry Todd, about the UFO when she returned from the grocery store that evening. She said she believed her son saw something unusual, but didn't start wondering seriously about it until she read a news story about the Muskegon sighting after her son told her about the UFO. He's never been one to make up stories, she said. Whatever he saw, I've never heard of anything like it. I even called my brother to tell him about it, and he said it was probably a stealth bomber that was being moved. Shirley Coyne, the Mutual UFO Network state director, said it was probably no stealth bomber. The Flushing Township resident received at least 6 reports in the past 9 months about a craft fitting the description the boy gave. It is very possible he could have seen this. I don't think he's making up stories, she said. We've had a lot of activity on the east side of the county close to Davison, Lapeer, and even in the Thumb area. People have seen a triangular-shaped craft like this.
And then what do we know about 3 days after this article? What happened just south of Flint?
The March 18th. Yeah, the Flint sighting. Coyne, a UFO investigator and enthusiast, said she is going to Muskegon next week to meet with the reporters from the news program 48 Hours. She believes the craft the boy saw was probably not the same one that passed over Muskegon. It was a different craft, the one that has been hanging around here. All we know is that it is a UFO, she said. We don't know who it belongs to or anything about it. We know it is silent and does have lights that beam down. It hovers, it maneuvers, and it moves in erratic patterns, she said. Air traffic controllers at the Bishop Airport Tower spotted nothing unusual on their radar the night of March 10th, said Ted Wazalewski, air traffic controller supervisor. So we've seen meteors before from just looking out of the tower, but I am not aware of anything unusual that evening, he said. Coyne isn't dissuaded. The FAA wouldn't tell us if they did see anything, she said.
And that's the same thing when Guy Merritt called over to that tower, and then he got transferred to somebody he thinks that was in a different government, something else, like trying to cover things up. So check out Guy Merritt's interview with us, episode 4, and that will blow your mind as well, because I believe, and I think Michelle's becoming a believer now as well, that these things are all connected with Michigan in March, and the whole state during the month of March in 1994 was just going UFO crazy.
Well, and that may not have been the start of it. Like I said, the puzzle pieces are slowly coming together, but most of the puzzle pieces are happening in March. Our situation and our observance of a craft happened in March, obviously many years later in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
But for that many people to see what they saw, for law enforcement, residents, for Jack to pick up what he did on radar, you're not fooling scientific equipment with a radar when that many blips in a certain formation can be spotted.
Yeah, and you know what? We're going to have a lot to say after the interview. So everybody, hold on to your hats, because we're going to get ready to jump into this, and we're going to tell you a little bit about Jack's background.
Well, we're going to tell you a whole lot about Jack's background.
So, Michelle, do you want to take this one?
Jack Bushong received his degree of meteorology at Florida State University in 1988. He trained for television weathercasting the following year, but was recruited by the National Weather Service, which is a federal agency and part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. His first NWS office was near his hometown of Muskegon, Michigan, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he had extensive training in surface weather observations, weather forecasting, and the issuance of severe weather warnings to the public. Mr. Bushong also received training in pilot weather briefings. In 1991, Mr. Bushong transferred to his hometown at the NWS office in Muskegon. NWS Muskegon was a weather radar site where he received extensive weather radar training in order to be on shift alone. The NWS was undergoing the most ambitious modernization and restructuring program through the early 1990s, where the new NWS Doppler Radar would become a major part of all NWS offices across the country. In 1994, Mr. Bushong was transferred with promotion to the NWS Southeast River Forecast Center in Atlanta, Georgia. The SERFC has responsibility for all river forecasting and river flooding forecasts across the southeastern U.S. and Puerto Rico. Mr. Bushong worked alongside hydrologists as a meteorologist, where he produced rainfall forecasts for river forecasting models. He was also trained in river forecasting and hydrology as well. So this is what Jack did after he left Michigan. One important duty for the SERFC by Mr. Bushong was to calibrate radar precipitation estimates based on ground-based rain gauges. Under his large area of responsibility, Mr. Bushong needed to have an enormous amount of training and knowledge of how weather radars work. Across the southeast U.S., 35 NWS radars are used in a mosaic and calibrated with over 2,000 rain gauges.
You cannot be one of these radar operators and have a C in a class. These are top-notch, educated, highly intelligent people that do this work.
So remember that when you hear Jack talk about his work with the radars in Muskegon.
And his internship.
Yep. So Mr. Bushong has a great interest in computer programming and web page development. From the beginning of the internet age, Mr. Bushong produced the first web page for the SERFC and remained webmaster until his retirement. Mr. Bushong also used his programming skills to produce graphics from the text products the NWS produced at the time by mapping river conditions and forecasts. Mr. Bushong was first webmaster across the NWS to create graphs, hydrographs in real time, depicting river and flood forecasts to make radar forecasts easier to read for customers such as FEMA. In fact, Mr. Bushong received the Regional Director's Award along with a cash bonus for not only a near-perfect rain forecast for Hurricane Floyd in 1999, but also rushed to complete the programming to display hydrographs as requested by FEMA. Hurricane Floyd resulted in the worst flooding in North Carolina history.
Yeah, I remember that. That was rough.
Yep. NWS headquarters decided to use Mr. Bushong's examples of new web products for their creation of the Advanced Hydrologic Prediction System, the AHPS. Mr. Bushong was also on the NWS team, which brought real-time NWS radar images to the web. After retirement from the NWS in 2016, Mr. Bushong kept his interest in computers and programming. Other interests include photography, drone photography and 3D printing, and playing Flight Simulator in his spare time.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Bushong has been a big fan of Microsoft Flight Simulator since 1993, fulfilling his strong interest in aircraft.
You don't play Flight Simulator.
You are Flight Simulator.
You fly Flight Simulator. That's how you want to do that. All right, everybody. It's that time. We need to get to this. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Jack Bushong Jr., featured in Something in the Sky, Unsolved Mysteries, Episode 2, Season 3. Jack, thank you for joining us. We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, to tell you folks, sounds like we have an awful lot in common. We've been talking for 45 minutes probably on everything that we have so much in common and what we're interested in. So thank you so much for having me on your show. I really, I am amazed at how much, how interested people are in this because, it seemed like I was very excited in 1994 after it happened, and I wanted to tell everybody, of course, the National Weather Service had forbidden me to talk to the media at all. They said, we're not going to let an intern talk to the media on something like this. Well, eventually, when I got to Atlanta, I was asked to be on a show. Wasn't really well known. I think it was on AMC, and my boss at the time didn't even know anything about this. He had no idea. So my new boss didn't know about the UFO bit. I'm glad he didn't. So I told him the reason why I was not allowed to be, or why they didn't want me to talk to the media, was because I was an intern. And he said, well, you're not an intern now. So, and the word intern really doesn't even make sense. And I'll explain that in a second. But
yeah, we can dig into that.
So I was finally, so basically my immediate supervisor in Atlanta allowed me to start talking about it. But still, there was, I would say about 50%, I would say it was right half and half, is when I talked to friends about the exciting thing that happened, even when I explained that so many people had seen it and they listened to the audio maybe a little bit, but you would get this look like, you could tell they just didn't buy it, or they didn't want to hear it. Or they thought you were weird. But you would get that silent look. They just didn't want to hear it, and yeah. So, and in fact, which is funny is that I actually had a trip planned to go down to Florida to see my mom, and the next week after this event happened, it was already planned. And so when I went down there, I had a lot to talk about to some of my friends and my family down there. And I actually went to my high school because I was new in the Weather Service, well, by about 5 years. But I wanted, but because I was down there while school was still in session, I went up and talked to some of my old teachers. And one of the high school teachers, it was Northeast High School in Fort Lauderdale, he was an earth and science teacher, just like yourself. And so I went up talking to him about that. I was a meteorologist. He was excited about that. But then I went in and started talking about the UFO that and he should have seen the look on his face. I was like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. So,
well, let's hold off on talking about the March 8th incident for a minute here, because I picked up on something on the intro to your episode that I want to talk about, because we've had so many guests on here that have seen UFOs and talk about their experiences, including myself and Michelle. That's how we got into this in the first place.
Really? Okay.
This is it really boggled our mind and what we saw. But we have people on, and they always talk about the synchronicities and things that seem to line up afterwards, or the weird things that happen kind of beforehand. And in the intro to that episode, you talk about the strange coincidences that would always happen to you, and they were so well known that people would say it could only happen to Jack.
Yep.
So can you share some, before we dig into the whole UFO thing and what happened, can you share what some of those strange things may have been, or what happened?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like not really like accidents, but I think maybe people thought I was a little clumsy, but in some cases. But like for instance, just like if I was, well, for instance, I was at a baseball game, and what happens is, the guy, when he hit the ball, he hit the ball, and then he threw his bat back. And where does it land? It lands right in my face, and that's one example. And then another thing that was crazy was, I had just gotten down. Now, this is the craziest story of them all, but I had gotten back from college, and I went to go see a friend down in Fort Lauderdale. And so I went up to knock on his door, and in Fort Lauderdale, they have those, they don't have mailboxes, out at the street. They have them hanging on their, right by their door. And they have like a little J hook, two of them for newspaper to be put in there, so it's a mailbox drop box. Well, anyway, I was hanging on to the J hook, and I knocked on the door, and I was waiting, and I hear this like snarling and like what sounded like claws on this cement patio, the front porch. And I look over, and it's this possum that's running right at me. And I'm like, you're just, and I have I have my hand on the mailbox, and the thing just was like, what on earth? I've never had a possum coming, like running at me. And so I was like, yeah, so I jumped up. It was like coming right at me, and I don't want to get bit. Right then I jumped up, and then I land down, and the door opens up, and it's the mother, and she sees that I had pulled the mailbox off her wall. So it's in my hand, and underneath my foot was the possum, like this, unsplashed. So somehow when I landed, I had my foot on its back, and so she's looking at me with a mailbox in my right hand and the possum underneath my left foot. And so anyway, she's sleeping. She's like, what in the heck? And she didn't really know me as well. It was a friend of mine, but she didn't really know me that much. And so, but honest, that's one of those things, like nobody believed that happened to me. And it wasn't until when I went back to college, this guy I knew, and I used to tell him, you wouldn't. I would go to him. I say, you wouldn't believe what happened to me today, and it was the same conversation, same thing. And so anyway, he didn't believe it, but it wasn't until Facebook came along, and I talked to the sister of this brother I knew, and I said, did your mom ever tell you the story about, and I tagged my friend, about when I pulled the mailbox off your wall and had a possum underneath my foot? And your mom answered the door, and she said, oh yeah. And so finally, after 30 years,
validation,
like, I can't believe it. He said, I never thought that, and so, yeah. And this actually was, it actually was started up. If you can imagine, I live, both in Fort Lauderdale and in Michigan during vacations. Is I had two social circles, one in Michigan, one in Fort Lauderdale, and then I had college, and so they all said the same thing. In fact, they still say, this is something like could only happen to Jack. And they say, honestly, you got to write a book because you have the strangest things happen to you. And of course, this UFO thing is the kicker of them all. But yeah, I just strange coincidences, and just like the fellow that was talking to me on the airplane, that just this past last week, and he goes, and he's from Calgary, and he goes, my God, I just sat next to you, and I turn on TV, the first thing I watch, and there you are. I just, and so just weird coincidences, and yeah, this is, yeah.
Well, the possum story, Jack, I'm telling you, you can honestly tell people that you tell that story to. You can't make something like that up.
I wouldn't think so, and because I've never heard of anything like that. Never heard of a possum come chasing after you. I mean, at least when I lifted my foot up, he went scurrying off. But the funny thing is I was probably in such shock. I didn't know the mailbox was in my hand. I didn't feel it. I didn't know my foot was on the possum back. I didn't feel it. It wasn't until I saw the mailbox in my hand and I saw the poor possum underneath my foot that it finally clicked. Of course, everything happened in such a quick amount of time. So yeah, I was in shock, and it's like something that you just can't believe yourself. And I think, when it comes to the story with the UFO, you just can't believe it's happening to you, and that's why I think when people say, "Oh, how come you didn't go out and get a camera?" Well, you're traumatized, or you're excited, and you're afraid that you're going to miss it. If you go, but you don't think about something like that. You're locked in on this incredible thing that's happening to you, that it's all you can think about. You don't think about grabbing a camera. Now, I'm thinking, would I, as a photographer who had a camera around my neck my entire life, maybe I would try to, but I don't know. I don't know if I would grab my camera or even think about it if I actually happened to see a UFO. I would like to. I've had my eye to the sky for all my life, and after the UFO incident, I'm just dying to finally actually see one. But every time I go to look, and I get interested in something, maybe that's a UFO. Oh no, I'm seeing red and green flashing lights. It's an airplane. And so but no, nothing I could really say that I've seen that was unexpected. Now there was that was unidentified. Now I might have to backtrack and say there was something that and this is unusual too, is that I was with my best friend I was telling you about, that we've known since kids, since we were babies, really. And we were in Saugatuck, Michigan. It was a resort town. And we were staying there with his parents. And we were at Lake Michigan at night. And we were talking about UFOs. And so we're about 12, 13, I guess. And as we were talking about it, we both saw what looked like two shooting stars, but they looked exactly like a shooting star, and they would have acted like a shooting star, except they dropped out of the sky. They went down, up in a Z like, and then back down, and they were parallel with each other. And that's something. And we both were like, we were just talking about UFOs, and voila, there you go. He actually thinks I'm psychic now or something, and but no, it's just a coincidence, that we happen to be talking about it, and then there you go. So I don't know. The only, it could have been, okay, I'm trying to maybe explain that it's a possibility it was two little meteors, or two little meteors, pebble size or whatever, that were coming in, and maybe it hit an inversion layer that made this refraction, kind of thing, that it hit a layer, and maybe it looked like it was mirrored up and down. But but that's a stretch. I don't know, but it was just really weird that we would see something. You never see a meteor. You always see it go in a straight line, always, no matter what direction they're going. You never see it changing direction. And so that was the only time that we actually saw something directly over Lake Michigan in Saugatuck. So that, I would say, that's the only thing that I could not explain really in the sky.
Well, and there's the common denominator, Jack, that you just mentioned with Lake Michigan. So, we got to do this. We got to take you back to March 8th of 94.
Yeah.
The uncanny event of over 300 sightings from Grand Haven all the way up to Muskegon. From your point of view, did it start with the phone call that came in, or did you, happen to spot anything on the radar prior to that call?
No, there would be no reason for me to look at the radar. It was a clear, cold night, 20 degrees. If you remember 1994, it was a cold year, a lot because Mount Pinatubo erupted the year or two before. And so if you remember, that was an extremely cold Michigan winter. And we had more snow than I ever seen before. I never saw Lake Michigan freeze over solid. We would take hikes out on the pier. It was probably not safe to do so, but it was just pure ice all the way out. It looked like the Arctic Ocean, but I didn't know that. I thought it was frozen. It was frozen all the way across, at least at the latitude of Muskegon. It wasn't until this past year, right after filming Unsolved Mysteries, that I found out that there was actually open water in the area where I saw that rendezvous point. So from talking to these, and I looked it up. It is true. This isn't somebody saying, oh, I heard there was some open water down there in southern Lake Michigan. No, I looked up the old maps. They take good satellite pictures, and they know, the Weather Service and the National Climatic Data Center, which is a part of NOAA. They keep good records about this stuff, and sure enough, they have a map that showed exactly where where it was ice covered and where there was open water. And sure enough, where I saw the rendezvous point of dozens of these UAPs, UFOs, was right at the northern edge of and that blew my mind too. It really did. And it completely goes along with the first time I ever heard of it was the upside down waterfall when I talked to the MUFON person, Virginia. Her name was Virginia. And so that really, really surprised me. Never heard that story. I also didn't hear, now I would expect with the flight pattern going to Chicago O'Hare, I would have thought that in that area, for crying out loud, some pilot had to have seen it on approach into Chicago, either if they were taking off in coming out of Chicago or landing into Chicago. They had to be going in or going across Lake Michigan, maybe a good 40, 50 miles south of where I saw the UFOs. So I would think that pilots would be able to see it if the UFOs had, all their lights on like they did, flying over.
In the episode,
turns out, it said there, the reporter said there was a couple airline pilots who did admit that they were there. And I was waiting to hear, did anybody, landing in Chicago or taking off see anything? Because I thought they should have. Somebody should have seen something. But it makes total sense in 1994 that pilots would not, they would not admit it. Absolutely not. And I can see why, for crying out loud, after what happened to me afterwards, for the most part, the Weather Service, I felt like, in the end, I felt like they were protecting me, which is fine, and the Weather Service did not want to be known as the UFO reporting center either. But they didn't know what to do. I mean, kind of there was a joke amongst a lot of the managers in Michigan saying, "Boy, I'm glad I'm not Leo. Here he just got to be the new manager there, and he's got to deal with this." And so they were kind of laughing about it. Now, it was the intern trainer who had to say, "No, that's not. No, there's nothing. No, he was professional. No, no." Finally, the director of the National Weather Service notified my direct supervisor, said that I would not have any repercussions against my career. He put his foot down and said, "Jack has nothing to worry about." Now, that's good and fine with what the director said, because I was an intern. Okay, and I have to explain how that works. But I had to kind of prove myself, as a new employee. Actually, I was there for 5 years by that point. So I got into computers. That's how I got it, and still into computers. I build my own computers now. I started programming. I learned. I went to, and that was at the advice from my supervisor, who was great, Leo. He was a great guy. He was a naval chief at one point. Anyway, he said, you ought to go in and learn computers. At that one time, we had a 386 machine just came into the office that we used for email, and learned that. And so I learned DOS, and then I learned Quick Basic. And so I actually started programming to make life easier for a lot of the guys at the weather office. We used to have to type things out, look at something and retype it when it was already written out. But we had to take summaries and then kind of actually, re-edit them to, and so instead of typing the whole thing out, so I made it so that I made this thing where, a couple programs that made life a lot easier.
Do you think that you would have done more than 22 years in meteorology if it had not been for that event in Michigan?
Actually, I started in 1989, and I retired in 2016.
Okay.
Well, I've told our listeners earlier in the show, before we brought you on, to make sure that they go and watch this episode and get a little bit more of your background and see what was going on. But I've got to ask you, you were in such a unique position as the weather radar station operator at that time on March 8th, 1994. Can you take us through what happened that night as you saw it, as things were going on, before you knew anything that was happening outside the radar building? Like, what transpired from your point of view?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I worked my first few years in, from 1989 to 1991. I worked in the Grand Rapids office, which, is just a few miles from, about 50 miles from Muskegon. But I asked for a transfer to Muskegon at my own cost, because I wanted to live, near Lake Michigan. There was an opening, but I also, because my family lived there and I had a lot of childhood friends there. So my wife and I had just gotten married in 1991, and then we moved to Muskegon. And so immediately, because it was a radar weather office, not all weather offices are radar offices. Grand Rapids was not one, but I did still have to know how the radar worked. And there would be a hotline between Grand Rapids and Muskegon, because we had to rely on what Muskegon was seeing on radar about whether or not we put out a severe thunderstorm warning or something. when I got to the weather office in Muskegon, I was not certified in radar, and it's the first thing I had to be. I could not be working alone on shift until I became radar certified, and that is a a lot of training. And so when people say, well, he was inexperienced, I would have to say, okay, wait a minute. Just like, yeah, you have your veteran doctors, for instance, but you also have the new doctors that just came out of college and medical school, and they have all that information fresh in their mind. And so I would, so when so in 1994, when this occurred, I knew a lot about the radar. I had to. I had gone to. There were several things going on. We had. I had to be radar certified, so I had to go through this big, thick manual, and take a test and become certified. And then I went to the National Weather Service Training Center in Kansas City and took a 3-week course in radar and everything about the radar. And it's not just looking for storms in the radar; it's how the radar works, the frequency, how everything, all the technical aspects about the radar, the science behind radar, and how it works. And so I knew its limitations, and the thing is not only did I know how the radar worked at that point, but you learn what can fool the radar too. So I was fresh in all that stuff, and so when I heard a meteorologist on, I saw a clip of a meteorologist from one of the stations in Michigan saying, "Oh, well, what he saw probably was an inversion layer, and and the beam, the radar beam, my radar beam is what it looks like. And I'll show that in a second again. Probably bounced off an inversion layer and came back down and picked up some stuff." Well, false, absolutely false. I know what radar, what ground clutter looks like. It's called, another word for it is anomalous propagation. And what that means is that the radar beam is pointed up a little bit, but then it's bounced off a layer, comes back down to the ground. And I'll tell you, the signature of ground clutter looks nothing like what I saw. Nothing looked like an airplane that's flying through the sky, that you can follow, like a dot. Ground clutter, and people see it all the time. You can see where the radars are if you look at the mosaic on the Weather Channel or something, because they'll have your little area of ground clutter where all the radars are, and it looks like it looks like precipitation. Actually, it doesn't look like a dot. And what it looked like at first to me was an airplane. It looked just like an airplane, and on those boring nights when I had to learn how to get, you had like riding a bicycle. You got to get the feel, or getting a new car. You got to get the feel of everything. You're in the dark. You got to know where all your buttons and cranks are, and so I actually practiced because the radar doesn't just go around and around. I can put it on manual mode where I can actually raise and lower the radar beam and also go side to side with it. And that's how we would actually look at radar at tops of thunderstorms to see how high they are, because that determines whether it'd be a severe thunderstorm or not. And also we can detect hail that way, for instance, and of course, trying to detect tornadoes. So we had to know an awful lot about the radar and everything about it. And so, I was out of the 5 guys that were working there, rotating shifts, I was the newest guy there, but I also had just read through the manual and went through the training class, and then we were also learning about the new radar, the Doppler radar that was coming online, which came online the very next year. Which is what we're still using today, the WSR 88D, our Doppler. That's when we went to Doppler radar and went to digital instead of analog. The radar that we have now I would not be able to do what I did before.
Okay.
So you can't manually control the new radars that we have out there today like I could. Basically, what I did was spot. It would be like I'm locking on to an aircraft, like, for instance, a military folk is, looking for enemy aircraft, and he locks his radar onto it. The airplane knows, that you got a radar looking at it, and and if you remember, this was during the Iraqi war, and you would hear about, with the no-fly zone and all that, you would hear about radars that were locking in on the aircraft, and they would be able to throw a bomb, a missile at that radar site. And let me tell you, I worried about it crossed my mind that is my radar console gonna blow up in my face with sparks and all sorts of things.
Right.
It did cross my mind. Briefly, but so I just wanted to give a little the background before I go in and start talking about about what happened that night. But I came in late in the game, and I think a lot of people might have gotten it wrong. Officer Velthouse had already gone to the Graves house and actually was chasing down the street in his patrol car, going in the direction towards Lake Michigan.
But you didn't know any of that, right?
I did not know this. No.
It's just like your phone rang. And
my phone rang, and Officer Velthouse was already chasing the lights going towards Lake Michigan. And so somebody tried to do the math and say, well, from the Graves house in Holland, and when Bushong saw the radar or the blip in or radar return in South Haven at 6,000 feet, I wouldn't be able to. Officer Velthouse wouldn't be able to see the same thing as I could. Well, that's because the timing is off. Velthouse was already well to the east, and they tried to call the FAA first, didn't get an answer, and then so they decided to call me, and so I would say probably a good 15 minutes elapsed. And if you consider maybe Officer Velthouse was going 60 miles an hour, he probably got about 15 miles closer to the South Haven than from the Graves house. So they're going to have to redo the math there. Whoever I saw, I think on YouTube channel, when they were explaining that. So Officer Velthouse, when I was talking to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher was talking to Velthouse at the very same time, Officer Velthouse was well to the west toward Lake Michigan than what people were led to believe. So yes, in fact, we could see the same thing. Yes, the curvature of the Earth does limit your ability to see. Our radar, of course, our radar dish is up, on a 75-foot pole, and which is, about 7 stories high, and so we have we have the ability the radar has the ability to see out 250 kilometers. Now I know in kilometers because that's just, that's how we, I'm not very good at converting it to miles, but we had to know everything in kilometers and meters and everything. So except for above ground level. Yeah, let's go figure. So kilometers distance away, but thousands of feet up and down in elevation. So we still use, in aviation terms, we still use imperial units. So to say that this thunderstorm height is 50,000
Right.
feet high. But so anyway, the one thing about the radar also is the radar beam, and I'm going to try to show it, is the radar beam is cone shaped, which is different from an air traffic control radar. An air traffic control radar is more of an oval shape like this, because in one swoop, when it goes all the way around, it wants to get a picture of the entire sky in one swoop. It has to. And so the FAA radar, to know the altitude of the airplane, they rely on that transponder that's on board the aircraft, and that's what determines what the altitude is. When you have a radar beam that's oval shaped, that's able to see from the ground all the way up as high as it can, you're not going to be able to know what elevation that is. And
I want to make a point here. People that are not in the know on how radar works, and you're showing a cone, and I will put a screenshot of that image up on our YouTube video. I'll put it in there for people to see. But one thing I want to point out is that whenever the media, whether it's the Weather Channel or whoever, a weatherman or Unsolved Mysteries, showing a graphic of radar moving, it's always looking like a flat 2D arc that's sweeping around. They never take into account that Z or Y axis, that it's a beam, like a flashlight. It's 3-dimensional, that's sending out the wave, the radar wave, and looking for a signature and a return coming back.
Exactly.
And people that are not in the know of that, and then what happens is they go out there and they try to debunk things when they don't fully understand how these beams and things are actually working. So It's very important for people to kind of get that image of the media stuff out of their head, that it's a 2D little arc spinning around. It's not.
Right. It's not. It's a 3-dimensional thing, and we're working in 3-dimensional space now. And that's exactly right. One thing is that we have a round dish. The Weather Service used a round dish. So the radar beam would go out in cone, and it's cone shaped because the further you go out, just like a flashlight, the wider it goes. So the problem is, the further away you get from the radar, the less resolution you can see. So at the distance that I could see the UFOs, and I'm going to just say because they're unidentified flying objects, is that if they were within, the radar beam was about a half mile wide at that point, at the distance 82 kilometers south of Muskegon. So any aircraft that was within a half mile of each other would show up as just one. Now, when they split apart, that's when I could see them. So I could not see, and I would say, wow, that looks really big. Well, it's possibly because and I've got my little things here, is that if they're flying in formation, like these little, let's say they're flying in formation, and like these little batteries, and there's 3 of them. If they're within the beam like that, I'm not going to be able to differentiate it. But if they're like kind of, separated by a little half mile, it's going to look like, it's going to bleed out and look like a bigger blip than a normal, just a single single spot, single aircraft.
What about if those things, so right now, just to describe people that aren't going to see the visuals on this, he's holding watch batteries flat against the beam so that they are laying on, if you think about it, they're kind of laying or being pressed against the beam with the wide edge on it. But what if the object was turned edge on to that radar? You would have a totally different signature, correct?
Yeah, you would have less of it if it was flat and I was looking at it flat. The power, I would still be able to see it, but it would be, the power of it would be less. But I'll tell you, the another thing that the thing about with the Weather Service radar is it's more focused.
Yes.
It's got more energy going out in a smaller area. It's not like the FAA radar that's wide. And so, as you know, just like a flashlight, if it's got a wide beam on it, the further away you go, the less powerful it is. But if you have a nice focused flashlight, yes, the beam spreads out cone shaped, but you're going to have a nice powerful radar. And so, so by seeing it, any kind of reflection of it is going to come back. And one thing that FAA radars don't have that the Weather Service radars do is we could see the amount of signal coming back. We could see the amount of energy that went out by the radar, transmitted, and then received, because we have to know that, because we have to know, well, is it light rain or is it heavy rain? Is there hail in there? Is it solid objects, hail, or is it liquid objects? And so, but the same goes true with aircraft or solid objects. And so the solid objects are going to they're going to just basically take the intensity graph and just spike it. And so you might have heard you might have heard me say on the 911 tape that I said they're spiking. Okay, that means that the amplitude graph was showing them spiking because the amount of energy coming back in such a small space, compared to like a big thunderstorm, a big heavy thunderstorm, which would be fuzzy and kind of wide. This was what an aircraft would look like. It came back as a spike. And the thing too is, I also had to raise the antenna or the radar cone, the radar dish, up a bit. And so, the further up I go with it, the less, if you know how refraction works, you're going at a deeper angle into the atmosphere, and so you have less of a chance of any kind of refraction where you get a bending. And that's our trick in getting rid of those times when we have an inversion layer, is we raise the antenna just a little bit. So usually it was at a half a degree going around and around. But if you're getting nothing but a mess of ground clutter, and a lot of times you would actually see the outline of Lake Michigan. It was kind of neat, but I could see the outline of Lake Michigan based on an inversion layer and the beam coming right back down to the earth. That's what it would look like. But
during this incident, you knew about how to do those tactics, right? To be able to use the radar.
Yep. Oh yeah, it was a daily occurrence.
Right.
Anomalous propagation or super refraction of the beam happens all the time. You get inversion layers all the time. And sometimes even when there's rain out there and it's hard to distinguish. And so the trick to get rid of it is to just raise the antenna just a little bit at a higher elevation or a higher angle into the atmosphere. And that would keep the radar beam, that would reduce the effects of the refraction, and I would be able to see see not the ground, but actually the precipitation,
Right.
So we want to be down as close to the ground as possible, because that's where the heavy, you want to see how much rain is falling on the ground, not just the rain that is falling out of the clouds and then evaporating on the way down. So we keep it as a low angle, 0.5 degrees. But yeah, if there was a lot of inversion layers here and there, and we couldn't figure out if it was rain or anomalous propagation, because the ground clutter would look very similar to the rain. All I had to do was raise the antenna and got rid of the ground clutter, and I could see the rain right away. Well, the same goes true with the objects that I saw that night. I had to point the antenna at times to follow them. They were going up to 85,000 feet. Now I think they were. I'm not sure. I know they went up to 55,000 feet, but I swear, at a brief moment, they got up to 85,000 feet. And the
So
thing is,
that brings up another question that I had about the capabilities of the radar.
Sure.
What was the range that with good resolution, what is the range you could get with that radar around the station, and then in, like you said, in thousands of feet above ground?
Okay, well, I think the highest angle was 5 degrees. So 10 times the normal elevation of the radar beam. 5 degrees doesn't seem like much, but it is. And so, because the further you go out, it's going up. And the thing is you can't see, because it's focused, because I'm focused like a flashlight. I only have and the distance of where the UFOs were, with the resolution of being a half mile, I had to look around. I had to go back and forth with that radar. And then, I went back and forth, then I went up a little bit, back and forth, went up a little bit, back and forth. And that's how I found them all. And so I did grid pattern, to go find them. And I would wave the radar back from say 5, and so I won't confuse you with degrees, but so I'll just say I wave the radar back and forth from 5 to 5 p.m. or 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, in that direction. So
Right.
From southeast to southwest. And so you turn a crank back and forth, and then there's another crank to raise it. So I turn the crank back and forth a few times, looking for the little dots, and then I would go up a couple degrees or a couple tenths of a degrees, go back and forth again, and then I kept doing that. And that's how I was able to kind of go back and forth and go up at the same time and be able to see them.
Okay,
And
so that brings me to another misconception that people, I think, see on stories that have to do with any kind of radar or anything, or maybe if they're driving past an airport and they happen to have a radar tower there, they constantly see the radar dish spinning around in a consistent RPM kind of a circle, right. And that's in everybody's mind. But didn't that type of radar you were using allow you to stop that motion and go backwards, like by hand, like you're saying, by crank, right? So you could focus it very close, or even bring it to a stop to send that radiation out in that cone in one direction constantly. It's not still spinning.
It's not. No, I had to, in order to see it, basically when the dispatcher told me, can you look for something down in South Haven? And it'd be just like if he said, can you look and see if this thunderstorm is severe down here in South Haven? You have to stop the radar from spinning around. I can't wait, 30 seconds or I can't remember what it was, maybe 45 seconds to go around. I can't wait that long. I have to take it and crank the radar back and forth using the hand crank, and you kind of just wave it so you can illuminate the whatever object you're trying to look at. And so yes, there's a switch that goes from automatic rotation to stopping it and making it manual, and it stops it dead in its tracks. And then I could take the radar cone, and the radar beam could go, I could take it side to side and go up and down with it. And so, as I said, to find these things, I would go at one I would wave it back, the radar beam back and forth at one elevation and or one altitude to see if, okay, were they at 1,000 feet above ground? Okay, no, nothing there. Okay, go up to 3,000 feet. Oh, nothing there. 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet. Keep going up. And then, finally, it took me a few minutes, on the tape, everything was in real time. Yeah. So I finally saw something at 6,000 feet. And so I would estimate when Officer Belthouse, he said he was well on his way towards Lake Michigan by the time he was not down as far as South Haven. He was taking the east-west road. He was going due west on this road. But he was actually much closer to where I saw it over South Haven. And so he, so definitely what we were seeing and what he was seeing, what I was seeing on radar was the same thing. And it was moving in the way that he described. He saw it moving in a southwesterly direction at a constant speed at first. And that's how I saw it. I saw it moving, and I even say on the tape, could be a plane, because I have tracked planes before. A lot of times I could actually spot I could turn off the radar rotation and go aim it at Chicago O'Hare, and I could actually pick up airliners from Chicago O'Hare that far away. I could actually see airliners, and I could track them going up, to their 15,000 feet, see them climbing 25, 30,000 feet. So I could see, and it was neat to be able to see airliners that far away on the radar. And so if I can see airliners as far away as Chicago, I can see, these things, that was much closer.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump in here real quick. You're talking about what you saw, and I know what they showed on Unsolved Mysteries, on the radar screen and stuff. But what did you see? What did it look like on the screen that you started tracking? And what kind of like maneuvering or characteristics did you see it that might have alerted you? What was it doing that might have alerted you that there was something odd going on with what it was you were tracking?
Okay. We had to be trained in pilot weather briefings. So we had some aircraft manuals, and I was already interested in airplanes anyway, so I knew a lot about them. In fact, it was around then when I bought Microsoft Flight Simulator 5, and so I started learning. So anyway, I knew quite a bit about planes, more than the average person, so I would say that at first it was moving in a southwesterly direction towards South Haven. So it was still a good, from South Haven. It was still a good, when I was starting to look for it, it was probably a good, say 15 miles from northeast of South Haven when I was starting to look for it. And when I finally saw it, I saw it moving, but when I finally calculated its distance away from the Muskegon and the radar, it was over South Haven. Now the thing is, though, is I saw it moving at first. It was moving like an airplane would. It had on the amplitude, the intensity graph, it spiked, and I said it's spiking, so it's something pretty solid. Those are my exact words. When it's spiking, it means that it's something pretty solid because it is a hard reflective object. And when you see something that's up at at an altitude of 6,000 feet, and you see nothing but a spot with nothing around it, and it's a solid spot with a high spike, and I could go, I could aim at it and I can aim away, and you're going to see that spike go up and down when you're going side to side or up and down with a radar beam. And so, I had that radar beam centered over that object, or they might, if they were within a half mile of each other, they would be, a couple of objects. As I said, the resolution was about a half mile. So if there were several right in formation there, I wouldn't have been able to differentiate. So the thing that struck me was that a few seconds after I was watching them going maybe 100 miles an hour, which seemed normal to me, it stopped. It started hovering just there, just stopped at about 6,000 feet, just started hovering. And so that's odd that would happen. And then all of a sudden, but see, I'm still waving my radar, right? Now I was going back and forth to make sure that it constantly kept illuminating, and I had to follow its movement by waving the radar back and forth a bit, because I had to pass that radar beam back and forth over it so I could illuminate it on the cathode ray tube that I had used, because it's the cathode ray tube is that thing that you have to, it's I guess it uses phosphorus or something like that kind of a glow in the dark kind of thing. You gotta brighten up that spot, and then it sits there for a while as it fades away. So you have to constantly kind of wave over it to keep being able to see it, and you could see it move, but then I could see it stop. Then it I kind of lost it a little bit. I couldn't figure out where it went. It was hovering at 6,000 feet for a few seconds. And so then I was looking for it. It just kind of just disappeared. And so then I went, so I was looking for it again, and and I knew it was hovering. So instead of going, I was kind of going side to side, but I actually I started waving the antenna going up and down. And that's when I saw 3 of them. And they were, the thing is that, so I'm waving back and forth to keep it illuminated, but I'm raising it too at the same time. And the thing is I saw them, go boom, 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 and I said they're lengthwise, and you hear that on the chart, because they were going directly down the beam of the radar. It's as if the 3 aircraft were lined perfectly with my radar beam. They were, the one that was there, and then 2 others had gone in a line, and whether it's coincidental or not, I don't know, but they were in perfect line with my radar.
You think they were aware that you were illuminating them?
At that point, well, that's when I said, "Oh my God, what is this?" Because, I thought this is too coincidental for them to. And I know that the Iraq War was going on. I knew that aircraft could detect, that I had locked on. I'm not just some radar going around and around like normal.
Right.
I spotted it, and I was illuminating it with a constant amount of electromagnetic radiation. And so whatever would be in there would know, this guy is spotting me, And so it's like it's almost like, and it took me a long time to think about this, because I honestly, for the longest time, I thought, okay, it's got to be like a military aircraft that's doing some kind of radar, doing some kind of tricks with my radar, because it was too coincidental to be in a direct line with my radar. It's just the radar being here, and then the first UFO, and then the second, and then the third. So radar, 3 UFOs, all in a straight line, except they were at different altitudes, but they were at a triangle in altitude. In other words, when I was looking at them, they were lined up with the radar, but they actually were in a vertical triangle on my on the not the that looking down scope, but looking on the side scope, going up and down. They were actually forming like a vertical triangle, like, say, one up here, up high, and then two at the same altitude down below, and being in a vertical triangular formation, which then flipped to being a horizontal triangular formation. So they went from being a vertical, and that's why, okay, if you hear on the tape, it says they're separated by a certain 1,000 feet. They're separated by 12,000 feet. That's because they were in that vertical triangular formation. They weren't separated by miles as far as horizontal on the ground. They were separated vertically.
Altitude,
by altitude. And they looked like a triangle on the scope. And that was just crazy to me.
And then when you're saying they went to the horizontal, they were at the same, right? Then
Yep. Then I lost them for a second, and all of a sudden I'm seeing three UFOs, generally at the same altitude now, but they were forming a horizontal at a constant altitude, a horizontal triangle. And so they went, and that was so difficult to explain, and I didn't think people would believe that. And in fact, the pilots had always just, they were just, doing radar jamming. But I learned, I went and studied a lot about radar jamming, and no, that's not how they radar jam. They do it. They do it different ways. And then I had to think, and after talking to some witnesses and hearing what they had to say, I would have to say, no, it's not an aircraft doing radar jamming or trying to play tricks with my radar.
Yeah, it's one of the questions I was going to ask you.
I was just getting ready to.
But one thing I want to point out to our listeners is that as a radar operator, and he's talking about concerns, Jack is talking about concerns about, this is wartime and seeing these things on radar moving around and wondering if his counsel's going to explode. We have ordnance in our military right now. We have a missile that's called a HARM missile, and that's a high speed anti-radiation missile. And they'll send fighters into areas protected by SAM radar that those radar stations control anti-air missiles, right?
Right.
And so they'll fire that missile in front of the fighter, and it looks for an active radar beam coming from the ground, and it locks in on the actual components of the radar.
No kidding.
It can sense the components that are generating the radiation from. Even if you shut it down, it now knows.
It still knows where that radar was. It
still knows where you, and that's how we took out radar sites during the Iraq War. So we didn't have to get shot down because the radars that controlled the SAM missiles were destroyed. So the SAM missiles would be blind unless they were like infrared. And tracking on heat. That's why they shot guns up in the air, the anti-aircraft, just throwing flak and, bullets into the air over Baghdad, because that's basically all they could do. And they were just praying to hit something. So that, as a radar operator during a time of war, even here in the United States, that could be a concern because other militaries have this same kind of technology too.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So, and that's something I wanted everybody to kind of understand that's a tactic to take out radars, is use an anti-radiation missile. Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember the Iraq War was going on, and I kept hearing about the U.S. taking out another radar site. So yeah, exactly. Yep. I didn't know how it worked. But that makes a lot of sense. And so, it crossed my mind, comically, it kind of cross my mind. I expected sparks and flames coming out of the radar consoles because I didn't know, well, if these are real UFOs and I'm making them mad, UFOs meaning flying saucers, if they were mad at me looking at them, then they could easily just shoot some, even if they just shot back a really high energy pulse, just kind of overloaded the EM radiation that I was shooting at it, and just sent back a tremendous amount. It could have popped my cathode tubes, right? Of course I use vacuum tubes, and I would have all sorts of sparks and things flying, and it did cross my mind, and I did get a little excited about it. I didn't want to be the one that ruined the radar and caused several $1,000s worth of damage, if not tens of thousands of dollars of damage or more. And so it did cross my mind, but it took, I guess it took a lot of years of hearing about UFO stories from other people, including people with radar, seeing it on radar and stuff, for me to think that these guys, it's like they were telling me, we know you're looking at us, and hello, and I mean, if they got all their lights on and stuff, I mean, I'm sure if they have advanced technology, they don't have to have so many lights on, I wouldn't think, and be all colorful and be flying right at treetop level.
For over 300 people to see them.
It's like they wanted to be seen, and whatever it was, obviously intelligently controlled, extreme advanced technology, and they wanted to be seen, and but they were, and it took me a while to think, is this their way? And this goes to the crop circles, but they, if the crop circles, and I don't know what to think about that. I have not studied
no
that.
idea.
I have no idea about that, but I know what you see is geometric shapes. So, and that's what it sounds like these things were doing, is they were making geometric shapes. Is that a way that how they communicate with each other? Or were they just trying to communicate with us? Or were they, I mean, it's just strange that they would, they were saying that they were going apart and coming together, going apart, coming together, and doing that triangle thing where one would shoot off, and it was always seemed to be 20. After I saw it, when I saw it moving at a slow speed, well, 100 miles an hour, and then it started hovering, and started acting crazy, I really didn't see them moving anymore. They just jumped. They jumped at 20-mile intervals, so around 20 to 30 miles. But it would always be like this. This one that I saw over South Haven would move first, and he was the most northernmost point. And then the other two would follow and form that triangle again. And so, and like I said on Unsolved Mysteries, it's like follow the leader. The one guy, first it was moving at a southwesterly direction at 100 miles an hour, hovered. Then I would say that main one shot out due west over Lake Michigan, and then the two that were south of it, shot and formed the same kind of triangle out over, and I would say they were about maybe, Lake Michigan is about 80 miles across, estimating. So first it was like 20 miles across, and then finally they got to the middle of Lake Michigan, which would be 40 miles across. So it seemed like they were right on the shoreline. I had seen it like kind of in the middle of the county, Allegan County, I think it is, whatever's south of Ottawa County. But and then I saw it shoot from the shoreline to 20 miles out, and then a shot to the main one shot out to halfway across Lake Michigan. They're right in the middle of Lake Michigan, and then they started moving southerly from there, and the other two would follow, and then I would naturally, because these objects were getting further away from the radar, they were just like seeing an airplane up close or seeing an airplane far away. On the radar, they looked big on the radar when they were closer at 82 kilometers when I saw them. And then as they got further and further away towards Chicago, they looked smaller and smaller. They didn't have as much strong of a spike on the amplitude graph. So that just tells me that they were further away. So they were they acted absolutely like, the signature of them on the radar was exactly what an aircraft or an airline, really an airliner size craft would look like. It's just that they moved and behaved in weird ways. And so I have no doubt in my mind that they were metallic, highly reflective craft, just like the fuselage and wings of an aircraft. And but they, I can't tell you what shape they were. I can't really tell you how big, except they look similar to what I would say an airliner would look like. And as they got further away, as I said, the signature got less and less. So everything told me, was not tricks of the radar. They wouldn't get smaller and smaller as it got further away. I mean, they were real objects, and I saw them at all sorts of different altitude. If there was refraction going on in any way, you would not see them moving in the vertical, well, you wouldn't really see them moving at all. But you wouldn't be able to pick out a point and then be able to follow it, And the other thing too that struck me is that I learned that really, except for a balloon, nothing can hover above about 50,000 feet. Helicopters cannot hover. There's not enough air density for something to hover at that height. And of course, balloons can't fly at thousands of miles an hour either. So I would say I would swear I saw one go up to 85,000 feet at one point, but I know they got up as high as 55,000 feet. So 85,000 feet is extreme. But to get there so fast, it would be, near impossible with the technology that I know about.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying the podcast. We're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors and some friends of the podcast.
Hi, this is Ray Szymanski, author of the Alien Shades of Grays trilogy, and you're listening to Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hi, I'm Greg Little, co-author of Origins of the God with England's Andrew Collins. It's a great book. It's about UFOs and the paranormal, and it gives an explanation. It's not what you think. And you are listening to Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hello, my name is Burton, and I am the host of Follow the Reaper podcast, where every episode we examine first and secondhand true paranormal encounters. And you're listening to Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
everyone. This is Jared Murphy of NotAliens.com, and you are listening to Wayne and Michelle from Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hey there, it's Richard Serrett, occasional weekend guest host of Coast to Coast AM and host of The Conspiracy Show. And you're listening to Wayne and Michelle's Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
What's up, everyone? This is Burton.
And Aaron from Lost in the Dark podcast.
And raise your horns because you're listening to Wayne and Michelle from the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
What is up, you guys? It's your girl Gemma Jade from Gemma Jade YouTube, Moon Bear Oracle, Paranormal Chop Shop. You're here listening to Wayne and Michelle with the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hi, this is Chris Lato of the Chris Lato YouTube channel, retired F-16 pilot turned UAP investigator, and you are listening to Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hi, this is Terry Lynn Keel, Director of MUFON Memberships, investigator, demonologist, and author of Alien Healing, the true story of a benevolent extraterrestrial. And you're listening to Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Michael Schrett, military aerospace historian and private pilot, and you are listening to Wayne and Michelle at the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast, and we're glad to have you with us today.
Hi, this is Seth Talk from MUFON, and the author of You Have the Right to Talk to Aliens, and the host of Alien Spirit TV with Sev on YouTube. You're listening to Wayne and Michelle at the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
What's happening, ladies and gentlemen? This is Big Willie with the UFO Garage podcast, where we're all about UFOs, aliens, and all things weird. I also run a podcast, Band of Bearded Brothers, with my brother Micah, BOBB for short, and you are listening to Wayne and Michelle with the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. So take a seat and buckle up as they educate us on all things woo.
Well, Jack, let me ask you a question, because we know that there's the 911 tapes from the March 8th incident. Do you know if there is the radar data that has been requested? Was it recorded? Or was it just spur of the moment data that you were collecting and only, your eyes saw what was going on?
Well, I wish I had I really wish I had a camera with me. And of course, as I was talking about getting a picture of it, you don't think about cameras, when you're so focused on something like that. But there was one thing is we had this, there was a company called Pan Am Weather Systems, and they actually took our radar feed from all the National Weather Service radars across the country. There were hundreds of them, hundreds of them. And what they did is they mosaicked all the radars together, and that's how you get your national map of radars. I mean, that's how it works. You take all these hundreds of radars and you mosaic the pictures together. And they still do that today that's how you can see the United States and all the radar data. And sometimes you can actually pick out where the radar that is, because you see the little ground clutter circles, where they are. But and so this Pan Am Weather Systems was doing that. They were contracted, or had a contract, I guess, somehow, that that they took all the radars and mosaicked them together. And when we had a monitor for this out, we had our radar room, which was in the back room, and it had to be dark in there, had the red light, was dark in there. And but out in the main operations area, we had a monitor. It was a color monitor, and they were color coded, and not the black and white 6-level grays that we would see on the radar. It was color coded. But I remember seeing, that's how I remember seeing that there were dozens of them over Southern Lake Michigan, was because I was seeing that on Pan Am Weather Systems on their monitor. And that's when I said on the tape, I can actually, and I was on the phone looking at it, I say, I actually see it on the computer part of it. And what I mean is there's a computer monitor, because we had this piece of equipment in there that was, in there to give us that national radar. And of course, you saw that on the Weather Channel, CNN, and all those at the cable channels at the same time. They were the ones that were the customers of these national radars. So they had recordings of this. But I was told that because I took the radar off automatic mode, Pan Am Weather Systems automatically eliminates that radar, from the mosaic. Now, thing is I saw it on that radar. There was a good bit of time. I had other duties to do. I had to go on weather radio. I had my weather radio where I had to put the weather on. I had my observations I had to do. And so I told them, and of course it was heard on the 911 tape. Yay, we may actually have a recording of this. Well, their excuse was, you took it off the automatic mode and put it on manual, so therefore it wasn't visible. No, it's not. I saw it on.
So there was, and now it's missing, but archive footage of what that radar was picking up that night.
Yeah, if Pan Am Weather System, I would imagine they were, record. Of course, they're doing radar loops.
Right.
They do it for like the last 48 hours. So sure, when there were dozens of them down.
Do you think people would be able to request that, like maybe a FOIA request or something like that?
I don't know, because it was actually a private company that no longer exists.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And so, to me, it just seemed like they didn't want to bother with it.
Yep.
They just didn't want to deal with it. And it would have been neat to have. It would have shown exactly what I saw. But I think I don't think there was any kind of a cover up maliciously. I think it's just they just didn't want to bother with it.
And they probably didn't know how to handle it.
They didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah. And it was 94.
It was 1994. And I think, and I know why the Weather Service didn't want me to talk to, and they were trying to protect me. It was my career was young. Yeah. And it makes sense that from the higher ups, they didn't want me to talk to the media, because it really could have destroyed my career more than, it could have been pretty bad, So the Weather Service, I think, made a good decision in that way. The problem is that they made it seem like a government conspiracy.
Yeah.
And so they should have really, and they even Leo mentioned, said we really should have had a press conference right after this and just come out and say what happened, but we're not going to, say who the radar operator is. I don't like that they tried to, just say, well, he's just an intern. I wasn't actually just an intern. I was actually considered a graduate intern. We were undergoing modernization at the time. And so there was a backlog of all these interns, thousands of them, across the country waiting to get to their new offices that were being built across the country in 1994. And so so a lot of us were just kind of stuck there. I had 5 years experience. I was a degreed meteorologist, which a lot of the guys that I worked with were highly respected veterans of Vietnam War, most of them. And so they knew their stuff, and I listened to them, and they were very good. And but I was a meteorologist and was in college and got a degree in this. And so, but I also took the radar course, and it was fresh in my mind. 3 radar courses, actually, and it was all fresh in my mind when I was looking at this. And plus, I knew the capabilities of the radar. I already had been playing around with it and spotting airliners over Chicago, So I knew what the radar could do and what it looked like. And what it looked like over Chicago, those airliners looked exactly what it looked like when I was looking at these things that were, except for their movements,
Well, and here's the thing, whether or not the Weather Service was trying to sweep things under the rug and keep things quiet at the time, there were still over 300 reports. And, eyes to the sky that night that saw this, it was just your scientific tool that was backing up, saying what they were seeing was not some figure of their imagination.
Right.
Plus
people were reporting it, and your radar was backing up the location of where these people were seeing it. That's
right.
That's, corroborating evidence.
Yes. And the other thing I would like to add to it is, and I asked Holly Graves I said, were these lights that you saw, would you say they were like plasma and just glowing lights? Or would you say there was solid craft underneath it? And she said solid craft underneath it. But the radar would be able to detect whether it was solid or not. I mean, I don't know if it was just a plasma ball, like a big thing of ball lightning, which it wouldn't. There was no meteorological sense for there to be ball lightning at that day. But I don't think the radar would be able to see ball lightning, It as I said, it looked like a big flying tin can. It was polished metal. It was reflective, and it returned nearly all the energy that I illuminated it with. I mean, it pegged it up to 100%. It didn't just go up part way up; it went all the way up. And as I said, it was spiking. And so, the graph was, down low, and then all of a sudden, boom, there it is. And one little point,
Well, one of the things I got to say about that episode, it was captivating. I mean, it was amazing. It was well done. It really brought a light to my attention about 1994 on the west side of the state. But we've had people on here talking about March, 94 on the east side of the state, seeing very large triangles and reporting abductions and things like that. So I was,
oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked that Bill from MUFON wasn't talking about what was going on the east side of the state as well. But I will say this. I got very upset the first time I watched that episode, to the point where I was ready to throw my remote through the TV with the way that not only and at first, I wasn't thinking about, well, how would the National Weather Service handle something like this? But the way that your coworkers and stuff were kind of ripping on you a little bit about, the radar,
and they did it, and they didn't do it maliciously. They were joking about it. It was all a joke,
That was one of the reasons why Michelle and I started talking to people, and we started this podcast, because we saw something in 2018, March 9th, 2018, right here at 275 and Ford Road. It was a giant, silent, hovering black triangle about 150 feet off the ground and 300 feet on a side, with these 3 orbs that were in each angle of the triangle that were emitting such bright light, but they weren't illuminating anything underneath it. Which
bright light and didn't reflect. That's weird. Wow.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And as we got close to it, like you said, the thought doesn't go through your mind to grab your cell phone camera. I mean, Michelle looks at it and goes, "When did our military get something like that?" I said, "That's not any kind of military craft." She rolls down the window as we're getting really close to it to get on the expressway. We almost had to go underneath it. We got that close to it. She's like, "It's not making a sound." I'm looking at it as we're merging on the expressway, and it looks like a heat mirage for a body. It was like wavering. It looked like heat coming off of a blacktop road. And it's just, this was March. It was ice cold.
We've already found like a string of correlations with the month of March in Michigan. A lot of times near bodies of water, or if there's any sort of nuclear power, because we're not far from Fermi.
Right.
So because we've heard a lot of stories come through even around like Lake Erie.
Yeah.
But one of the things I want to go back to when Wayne, I think you said something about, how they were not reporting sightings on the east side.
Right.
It was reported there are 82 counties
in Michigan,
in the state of Michigan, and it was either 40 or 42 counties in March of 94 had reported sightings. So that would cover not only the west side of the state, but what they were noticing around Flint. Yeah, the east side, about around mid-Michigan, around the Flint area, because there were reportings from that area as well.
Yeah, and so my earlier point was when we started talking to people about this and our own sighting, and we didn't want to come out and talk about it, we started kind of a private Facebook group app asking people, "Did you guys see anything on this night, about 2:30 in the morning at this location?"
Yeah.
And our Facebook group now in 4 years is now almost 7,000 people.
We've got
my goodness,
sending us stuff and reports. And we had people that also came on there and exactly said that they saw the same thing, but miles away. Moving west, and then it would just disappear, and then it would show up toward Grand Rapids, and then it was gone.
Yeah, we've been trying to find people in the Canton, Michigan area.
Yeah,
that saw the same thing that we saw that night, but
the stigma,
no luck yet.
And that was one of the things we were like, we want people to come on and go to a Facebook group, and then come on our show or send us their stories and feel safe to get that off of their chest and let them know, hey, I'm a Bachelor of Science. I graduated top of my class in Earth and Space Science. Okay. I do astronomy. I do geology. I know how the Earth works, orbits, planets, all of that stuff. Michelle has got a master's degree and been teaching for 23 years, in ELA and stuff. And we had this happen to us. We didn't ask for it.
Amazing. Right.
And the response has been incredible, and people coming forward. And we have a story that we're going to read on the show when we publish this. That is a woman that's like, "Thank you for allowing me to come on here and tell you what happened, what I saw."
And now, when was this that happened to you?
This was March 9th, 2018. And
Okay.
3 people we interviewed had the triangle incident. We had them all on the same show one time, and it
Okay.
was March 9th, 1994, that this thing was
Really?
just south of
Okay.
Flint, Michigan by Bishop Airport, a giant
Okay.
triangle hovering over US 23. And
So the
these
day
reports,
after they were, okay, they were in
Or
West
was
Michigan.
it March 18th, 94?
March 9th.
You
Yeah,
said
18th, 94.
March-
okay.
Yeah, my
all the March
West
dates
Michigan
start
was
blending
March 8th.
together.
Yeah, it was
right. Yeah, I know,
8 or 9 days after the
Okay.
March 8 event. It was like, 10 days later or something like that. That
Right,
these things
right.
were showing up.
Yeah.
And there's even reports of women waking up in their vehicle. Like one woman was sleeping, the other one was driving to work. The woman wakes up because she fell asleep in the vehicle on the way to work, and the vehicle's spinning around in circles, and they're up in the air, and
Oh my God! Yeah.
they're being put in this. It's on a MUFON report.
Okay.
And then the next thing she knows, they're back on southbound or northbound US 23, but they're going in the south direction. They had to cut across the expressway to get back onto southbound US 23, or they were going to be in head-on accidents.
I see.
And they lost that time. I mean, just like things that are just wacky, and then the experiences that started happening with people. So
Right.
that's kind of why we started doing what we were doing. We were like, you
Sure.
know what, let's get down to this. We'll do our own
Right.
investigations, and we'll talk to people and give them a forum to talk. And
Yeah.
that's what upset me, because in 94 there was still that stigma and things going on
Oh yeah.
in this UFO. But imagine what happened to people who saw things from the 40s and were reporting them, like Project Blue Book. And then in 1966, we had Blue Book here for the swamp gas thing. 120 co-eds at Hillsdale saw UFOs flying around. Police were chasing them in their cars. There was aircraft sent out from Selfridge to intercept these things, and people saw all this happen. We got testimony from one of the pilots before he passed away, so kind of like on his deathbed, saying that he was dispatched to chase these things, and what they saw were these metal disc type things flying across the ground, and it was swamp gas, and everything went quiet. And they've just been squashing stuff left and right. And that was Hynek that came out.
Until you're right. There's a television show. I don't know if it's coming back or not, but I did watch. I didn't know. I mean, I knew the Project Blue Book, but I didn't know about the professor that was coming out. And but there is something on one of the cable channels that kind of goes along with
he flipped. He came out.
He flipped.
Yeah, he flipped. His son is now big in he had passed away, but he flipped his position, and now there's the Hynek Research Facility for UFOs or whatever, like a little institute that he started, and his son is kind of running it now. And you might, if you go to any of these UFO conferences, which I'm putting $1 million on, that you're going to get all kinds of invites to go speak. You'll probably run into Hynek's son. And
really? Okay.
Yeah. And he came out in his book and said that his job was to dismiss these things.
Yeah.
Period. End of discussion. That's why they brought him on as
well. Then I was hearing about that the military was trying to put out because they were testing aircraft, so they wanted their experimental aircraft to be thought of as UFOs, their cover story. But
it's a good cover story, but not to the detriment of people.
Right. And now, and the reason why I'm talking more candidly about it, I mean, I was always, it's just that I didn't mention things. I mean, I was always, I would discuss the tape and what was really going on during that. But there were things that I just didn't want to say because I didn't think because it was too far out. It's just like that little story about my little interaction with the possum. That's just something that never happens, And so I didn't think people would believe me, and I think I really worried about my credibility on that. And as a scientist yourself, credibility means a lot,
Absolutely.
and because once you lose it, then people don't know how to trust you in science, anymore. And so, but I think this is I think there is a real science to this, and it's just we haven't discovered yet. I just remember reading a newspaper article from the early 1900s where scientists actually said that heavier than air flight was impossible. We'd never do it. So yeah, they need to. Scientists become believers when they finally see it for themselves, and so I did, and so yeah, and it took. Believe me, I didn't go just from saying these were not believing in UFOs or aliens from other planets to all of a sudden they're UFOs and they're aliens. It took me 30 years to try to think about it, to the point where, as I said, I literally gave myself headaches.
Right.
Trying to figure it out, trying to absorb information I was hearing from other people. And then when I started hearing kind of similar things to what I saw on radar, and I hear other radar operators from the military saying that they moved the same exact way in the last couple of years, when the Navy came out talking about it, I knew, okay, I'm not the only one, and so it finally allowed me to come out and say, kind of like say, I told you so. And also, finally, the U.S. government is trying to do something about it, and they're not ridiculing people. Now, I'd hope that pilots, and I live in an area, I'm close to the Atlanta airport, so I live in an area where there's a lot of pilots in my area. And so I wish I could talk to some of them and ask, have you seen anything in the skies? But I don't know if they would, to be honest. Not yet. I don't know how you could spend all those hours in the air and not see something that you can't explain. But and I don't know. I've looked myself, constantly, and I've never seen anything except for that day when I was with my friend in Lake Michigan. We both saw it at the same time. But I know they exist. I remember when I had to do an interview back in the early 2000s, I went and talked to a teacher where my wife taught. It was a biologist, actually. And I talked to him about, I said, these things were playing around like they were playing, doing all these crazy movements and maneuvers and stuff like that. And he joked around. He said adolescent aliens, just teenage aliens that are playing around, that was his joke. But he did take it seriously, and it made him wonder himself. He wanted to talk to me. So, but honestly, I don't know the way they acted. I just couldn't, they just seemed like they wanted to be seen, and it seemed like they were showing off too. And it brings me back to a story where there was I think there was a school a school ground of kids where actually saw a UFO.
The Zimbabwe children.
I think you're right. Yeah. And it seemed like
the aerial school.
That's the aerial school Zimbabwe.
Right. Yeah. And it sounded like they were showing off a little bit, And then there was the fellow who videotaped it where he was shining different colored LED lights at some UFO, and they were matching it the same colors. I heard that story. So they're communicating, whatever they are, they're communicating, and so sometimes I hear stories about that they're friendly, and other times I hear they're nightmares. So I don't know, I don't know what's going on, to be honest.
Well, and it depends on who you talk to, and as far as the different classifications when they do talk about aliens, whether it's the reptilians or whether it's the grays.
Yeah, sometimes it gets a little out there.
Yeah, it does. I mean, but here's the thing. Did we see was something seen in the sky that couldn't be identified? Yes. Was it flying? Yes. Was it an object? Yes. Thank you. It was a UFO.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
unidentified flying object.
Exactly.
Now we have to call it unidentified aerial phenomena.
I refuse.
We can still. We have talked to folks that they simply say that is a government term, so we can say UFO and like my kids say, keep it old school. So.
Well, I consider aerial phenomena as some kind of weather thing that we can't figure out. When you see a craft that's flying through the sky, it's a flying object. Yes,
exactly.
You're right. Yeah.
Now, since your retirement and this investigation into everything that was seen in Michigan when you were talking to Virginia Tilley, was there anyone else that you spoke to at that time that you found new information about, including maybe even that couple that was camping?
Well, that's the most interesting, and I want to talk to Virginia Tilley more about it. She has. Believe me, I've been busy because of other, like my truck is out of commission right now. I'm trying to get that thing fixed. Just to show you, life is still going on, but I'm also busy like crazy. And I went down to see my parents last week. I actually watched the show on that Tuesday night with my mom and dad. They're still alive in their 90s, and they're divorced, but they get along very well because all their friends, they've outlived all their friends. So anyway, so my stepmother, my sister, and I, and mom and dad, we all watched together, and so so I'm hearing nothing but good things. I think Unsolved Mysteries did an excellent job with getting it together. They did very well. I'm very proud of their work. Because this is such a complex thing to talk about, as I'm talking to you right now in one big long conversation, and I tend to repeat myself. I tend to go off in tangents. Yes, I do, but Unsolved Mysteries, they took all that hours and hours of me talking and made it to where I looked good. I was actually not as good as they, communicator as people said I was on there, because they really knew how to splice it up to where I sounded.
And I do want to say, this is why people like to listen to podcasts, though, is because they do see something like that. But there's a lot of people that, Joe Rogan has proved it millions of dollars over, that people like the long form conversations and listening. That we kind of love listening to people talk. We're educators, so we're talking all day, but we're also listeners. We have to listen to the students and listen for things. And people are we got to give more credit to people that want to listen to these long form conversations, because they get a lot out of them, and they enjoy
I hope
them.
so.
Yeah.
I hope so. But yeah, I think, and I like to be able to talk
exactly
more in technical terms, because as I said, I really need to get out that paper that's purely scientific observations. No, I'm not going to talk about aliens in this first draft. I'm going to talk about, this is the radar, this is how it works, this is what I saw, this is what it isn't. And I'm going to go through the ground clutter bit that I heard a TV meteorologist say that's what it was. I'm going to go through the swamp gas and how the radar doesn't detect swamp gas or even any kind of gas at all. Gas does not reflect anything,
Right.
There are some radars that can, if they're tuned correctly at a certain interval, of course, but ours are detected, they're tuned to detect liquid and solid objects. That's it. They can see birds, they can see planes, they can see hail, and they can see rain, water, and they can see ground ground clutter does not look like a spot,
Right.
It might, if there was a 20-story building that was near the radar site, it could look like that, but you also don't see the building flying around at 72,000 miles an hour either, and going up to 80,000 feet.
And you don't see these objects on a radar playing cat and mouse with the radar as it is picking up their signal either.
Right. Yeah.
And that weird snapping, it looked to me like a rubber band snapping. Like the one would move, and then the other one would like snap. Like they were locked into position, but moving at different times.
Yes.
Very strange.
And so that's why I want to go and talk to some of these people, because I want to hear, I know what I saw on the radar, how it acted, and I know people were saying it was coming apart and coming back together. And sure, I could see that. Now, if they came back together, sure, those two would disappear and I'd only see one, but because of the resolution of the radar. But from the point on, after it passed through Holland and started going out over Lake Michigan, it seemed like they always just kept that triangle with the follow leader, with the snapping motion, like you say. And it was just like that. Why, I have no idea what they were doing. But to me, it seemed like they were trying to communicate in some way.
Well, when I saw the movement, it almost reminded me of like if you're doing some kind of graphic stuff on the computer, like a graphics program, and you have the snap to grid on kind of thing, and your mouse will shoot over to the closest, right? Dink, it looked kind of like that. I was like, wow, that's really bizarre.
It is. It's, and that's why it doesn't make sense to humans, does it?
Right, exactly.
And so, they're intelligent, follow the leader, what it reminded me of was insects. I remember watching, I don't know, so, I was watching a bunch of ants, and I was watching them doing little, back and forth things in circles and stuff like that. And I was like thinking, well, ants make their movements and that's how they communicate, and, or other bugs too. That's how they communicate, is through their movements. And so, it just made me wonder. That's what made me wonder, is, are they communicating with us or are they communicating with each other? Is that what they're doing, or are they just showing off? Or was it radar jamming for military? And of course, I had to get proof from people's witnesses, testimony, that what I saw on radar is exactly what people were seeing on the ground. And then I knew it was not false echoes. they were not playing tricks with my radar. Where they were located was exactly where these people were seeing. And so and then also when they were out over the middle of Lake Michigan, and I saw dozens of them, I don't know where they came from. Now somebody seemed to have I heard some story where there were some other reports down in Indiana or Illinois where they saw UFOs down there moving northward, kind of towards where they were kind of meeting in that Lake Michigan vicinity. But the thing is that I saw all these dozens of UFOs that I saw were separated both in space, in horizontal and vertical space, but they were hovering, except for a few. Every once, I would actually see most of them hovering, but I would see a few moving really slowly amongst themselves, And so almost all of them were hovering, but I would see maybe 2 or 3 of them kind of moving a little bit, amongst themselves in between all the different returns. And so it was pretty neat to watch, but it honestly looked like a swarm of ants. Looked like a swarm of ants that found a big, chunk of the sugar cube or something like that,
Wasn't that over the area where the ice was present?
It was it was at the most northern edge of open water. Yeah, when I couldn't believe it when I saw when I finally saw the map from NOAA showing where the ice was during that day, March 8th, 1994. And you can see it by radar, basically. I think not radar, I'm sorry, satellite. It lined up perfectly with where I remember seeing them. The same latitude as, I know they were in the middle of Lake Michigan, right smack dab in the middle of Lake Michigan, but they were at the same latitude that was just south of that ice line, and I believe they consider lack of ice less than 20% ice coverage, So yeah, that was another interesting coincidence, and it goes along with what I never even heard of is this upside down waterfall. That just I had to have Virginia Tilly actually repeat herself because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And it sounds like that couple, they were so frightened by it that they left all their stuff out there, all their, that cold weather gear is expensive, expensive warm weather sleeping bags and all that stuff. And they left it there. They never came back to get it. They were so frightened. And that's what Virginia told me. I would love to hear and talk to these people because I really, now the thing is right now, the thing is of course the radar would not be able to see because of course I could see the objects that were thousands of feet above the ground, which there were several of them. But if they were really close to the Lake Michigan, down towards ground level, the radar would not be able to pick it up due to the curvature of the Earth. So, yes, the world is round, by the way. It's a globe.
Radar proves it.
Radar proves it, yeah. So anyway, so there were obviously many more that were closer to the ground, or closer to the water level, lake level there, that I couldn't see, So, but I had it set at 0.5 degree as normal, and that's when I was able to see those showing up on the Pan Am Weather Systems monitor. Now, I'd like to calculate what altitude that was. I can't remember, honestly. It wasn't most of the my notes went from, because I took the tapes and listened to it dozens and hundreds of times and took notes of what I was seeing. And that's why I can remember everything, why it's so ingrained, because thank goodness for that tape, so, it's kind of like having a photo album.
Yep.
You can remember when you look at a photo album and you look at it from, year to year, you can go back and, hey, I remember that day and I remember what happened that day and stuff like that. Well, the same memory goes when you have a recording of your conversation. And I don't think I would really remember a fraction of what was going on without that tape. So I'm glad it was recorded, and thank goodness it was. Otherwise, I don't think anybody would really believe me.
I thought something was mentioned with the calibration as far as where the campers were and where the waterfall was seen was around 5,000 feet.
Okay. Yeah,
is what I remember.
It was either 5,000 or 6,000.
Yeah, it was 5,000 or 6,000, which would put that about what, a mile?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I would have to see it that. Well, I know that when they were over South Haven, I was able to see them at 6,000 feet.
Okay.
So, if they were over the middle of Lake Michigan and they're the same latitude as South Haven, which I think they were, then yeah, it would make sense that I could still see them at 5,000 or 6,000 feet. Yes.
Yeah, it was from what I remember, and I've watched the episode multiple times now, is that I remember hearing that and just thinking, okay, this is a mile high waterfall. Yeah. I think that I would leave the beach area.
Wasn't the water going up?
Yes, the water was going up.
Yeah,
that's what Virginia said.
Yeah, it was being drawn up out of the open waters of Lake Michigan. So, I mean, we could go down all kinds of crazy rabbit holes with that one as far as theories with the fresh water being around Michigan, and what would the purpose of drawing water out of Lake Michigan be at that time?
Right. Yeah.
I think it's a coolant. I think they use it as some type of a coolant for their propulsion systems, and it's clean, fresh water and high abundance. And I think, if they are, I'm not going to say they're aliens, but there's some type of advanced craft or some type of advanced propulsion system. Obviously, you saw them moving around on radar.
Yeah.
In any kind of any kind of propulsion system of some type is going to have to generate heat somehow, some type of energy.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, from a science standpoint, you got to convert one thing to energy to get things to move or do whatever it's going to do.
Well, nuclear power plants have to have water. The rods have to be in water.
Right.
Constant circulation, or you get a meltdown. So yeah, that would make sense. The water would have to be, and it'd be pretty cold water, that's for sure. Near freezing. In fact, I build, as I said, I build my own computers, and I have a liquid. I actually made my own water cooling thing,
cooler,
loops, and so it's a good cooling agent. Yeah.
One thing I'm going to send to you via Facebook is on our Facebook group, a mutual friend of our podcast and a friend, Guy Merritt, who was our very first guest that talked about his triangle situation in 94 on March 18th of 1994. And he put up a video of, in Australia, all of these people reported a UFO. I don't know what the date was, but there was some type of object flying over a lake that was shooting 3 beams down into the water, and the beams were penetrating the water, not illuminating the water. It was going down inside the water and then drawing water up. They could hear the rushing water going up into this thing, and then it would stop. and then some type of liquid was being ejected from it, and then it takes off. And I'm going to send you that video. It's like a 1.5-minute report.
Yes, I'd like to see that. Sure.
Yeah,
okay.
it's from an Australian news site. And it was a while ago. I want to say it looks like the 80s time frame, maybe 90s.
Yeah. Okay.
But just the columns of water that they were talking about being pulled up out of this lake, just fascinating. And then there's this, he happens to remember this after we talked and watched the episode of, the water column is so damn interesting, and you just get a little blurb of it at the end, and I'm sure probably because they couldn't find witnesses.
Right. If I had heard that, I would have tried to see it on radar, but I have a feeling that it was even though I might be able to see it 6,000 feet, I don't know what it would have looked like on radar, because you were talking about liquid,
right,
and a solid craft. But it probably would have looked like a line, all the way down to the ground, I would say. But I'm going to have to calculate and see how low I would have been able to see at the distance I saw. There comes to a point where when I had to have the radar set at 1/2 degree, and that's when I saw them. There is an estimate of the altitude that I would have seen them at. So, and I was getting close there when I was seeing them in the middle of Lake Michigan. I was getting close to where I had to finish up my work, and as I said, I had to do my my forecasts and weather radio and weather observations and all that stuff. So, I could, as much as I wanted to stare at them and look at them all night, I couldn't do it,
Yeah.
But they were there for hours, every time I went to the radar, I could find them and see them,
and then you say in the episode on Netflix that they eventually faded away.
Yeah, they just
left
one
the
by
area.
Right. Yeah. There were like a ton of them, when they first got to the middle of Lake Michigan, it seemed like there was more and more. They kept getting more and more, and then they just slowly dropped away. Little by little, there was fewer and fewer as I was watching them as time went on. Yeah. That's exactly. That was some.
We've been at it, I don't know how long. I think the Zoom has just stopped calculating like how many hours we've been talking now. It just gave up. So I think we should probably start to wrap up the conversation. And I just want to turn it over to you before we end the recording here. And any last words you want to put out there, maybe where people can find you, if you got a YouTube channel, some type of website? I mean, let's get people involved.
Well, sure. Mainly people I'm pretty big user of Facebook. And so if you write me a message on Facebook, at this point, I will get it. Now I'm getting dozens, maybe 100 messages. So I will get I will get to you, I promise, but I'm overwhelmed right now. So, a lot of people are telling me stories. I'm getting questions, and sometimes it's just saying, "Hey, Jack, you did a great job. Thank you." And so I very much appreciate the feedback. I've only gotten one bad thing from somebody on Twitter. But
there's the problem. It's from Twitter.
Right. It's from Twitter, and I highly doubt that person even looked at the episode. So, and she probably doesn't know anything about who I am, what I saw, and anything. So I ignore those things. But anyway, my plan is to go ahead and form a Facebook group initially. And then that way, we can all kind of discuss that March 1994 episode, because I would love to hear from them And even if I go to Michigan a lot. I have family and friends up there still. So just to have people draw what they saw and the movements and stuff like that, that could tell me a lot. But
and I know you're pretty much focused on that March 8th event, but I
of course.
I would like to help you.
You want to hear more? Sure.
And be a part of, that investigation as well. But I also want to try to tie this into this March connection that we have here in the whole state. And I think we could, get some really great evidence, and look at these things together. But that's something we can talk about.
Sure. Yeah.
Later on.
I have no doubt. Yeah. We have lakes. We have the lakes all across, surrounded Michigan, Lake Michigan. Michigan. And, I honestly would not be surprised if there's some UFO base down underneath Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan is very deep, and
man, Superior is ridiculous.
Yeah. So it's you never know what's down there, and under the oceans either.
Exactly.
Or I've heard, other people think that they're, on the far side of the moon. I think it was Buzz Aldrin who said he saw a campfire down on the far side of the moon. It was nighttime on that side.
Here's the thing. There's a reason why the creativity of H.G. Wells when he did War of the Worlds.
Yeah, it makes you wonder.
Oh, yeah.
It really does. If there was something at that time that they knew that we don't.
Right.
Or they were inspired, right?
Yeah.
They could have been inspired by a sighting. And
well, I it seems like, doing my own research, it seems like a lot of the sightings started occurring right after World War II. And of course, we blew up our first atomic bombs, and that could have frightened, if let's say our galaxy is full of life that's able to travel, I'm sure it would have frightened, concerned a lot of any species that all of a sudden we have the capability of just completely destroying all life on the planet. And so there's that theory, of course, that makes a lot of sense. And I kind of wonder about this. And I was actually, since there's a pretty bad war going on with Russia and Ukraine, I do occasionally Google Ukraine UFO, and occasionally they do see stuff, and not just because there might be some pretty gee whiz military aircraft out there, but because I think if we are being visited, and I think we are now, I think they would be interested in that war. And in fact, there was something I saw today. If you look at CBN, there's a YouTube video where Ukrainians said that this flying saucer type thing used like a death ray thing and absolutely took out a column of tanks, Russian tanks. That video came out within the last 24 hours. And this is on CBN, the Christian Broadcast Network. So, he said flying saucer and UFO. CBN thinks it's divine intervention, but there is. Go ahead and take a look at that YouTube video if you can find it. I do have it. If you can't find it, I can find it in my history, and I can send it to you. But sure, I could imagine if we're like, I'm beginning to believe in panspermia, for instance, and that life is around, and I think that I'm sure we've been observed for I believe in the zoo hypothesis, I guess. And so I would imagine they are concerned with our extreme violence, So, I've heard too many stories about military folks coming into contact with these things. There was, I guess, a battle where where I think they were shooting at the UFO or the flying saucer, and it made some some crazy movements, and then started shooting back at them. But and then the other thing too is that really gets me is that war of the UFOs back in Europe in the 1500s. They have that is crazy. They have they have a drawing of it, and they have smoke over in this one place, like something crashed, and then strange figures to show these like X's or plus signs, because they didn't know how to draw them. But that is just nuts, So it's like, why were UFOs? They're not something from humans back then, but why were they fighting each other? What's going on? What's going on with that?
There's all kinds of things out there that seem to point us all back to these. We have some kind of visitors or watchers, or if you want to go back through the Bible, Ezekiel's wheel, and it goes, how are things being interpreted? And then, at the time and technology of the day, what are people going to report and say things look like? I mean, it's a rabbit hole that you can go down, but there's so much fascinating stuff. And Michelle and I are new to this, digging into this, and like there's so much. And there's the theories out there too of like these things are here right now, whatever they are. There's some type of a different being, but they live outside of either our perception or our slash reality, since we see such a small part of the light spectrum.
Right.
We only see a very sliver, and we got to use instruments to see into infrared and obviously radar and things.
Right.
And, every once in a while, it seems like these things get picked up or they get noticed or something, they have to turn off or come into our visible light range to, I don't know, get fresh water or to be seen, right. To be like, hey, here we are.
Yeah.
Check out this column of water.
I read, no, I didn't read it. There was a YouTube channel where they said that these people that have night goggles are seeing craft fly at night that you couldn't otherwise, and they're taking video of it, that you couldn't otherwise see it, with the naked eye. That's interesting. It makes me want to go out now and get some night goggles.
I was just going to say night vision goggles, and let's go camping out at Lake Michigan.
Right, exactly.
And some real powerful, and some real powerful binoculars too,
Right, powerful. Yeah. Well, my wife's going to say, I swear, Joy, I this is the last thing I need, and then I'm through,
I'm not buying anything else.
That's the last thing I need to buy. So that's good grief. The technology is just going so fast, and it's very interesting, and I'm so happy the Navy came out and started. Now, one thing that
Army, I'm going to say this as an Army guy, I'm glad that the Air Force is being quiet and hiding off in the corner, because they really screwed things up when they first came out with Project Blue Book and what they did with people. So let's see if the Navy can handle it. And
that
probably the Air
great,
Force is going, not again, guys. We'll give it to the Navy guys. They'll have fun with that.
That's great. But what the funny thing is though, is I noticed that I got an unusual number of hits, of course, on LinkedIn, and I had to pay $99. I get a free month, and then they start charging me $99 a month, but they tell me who has been seeing my account. And after the episode, you're right. Department of Navy, NOAA administrator, and a lot of marine biologists.
Yeah,
I don't
know
know.
why I think. Here's my idea. Here's my crazy theory. Why I think the Navy's really involved in this, because it might be UAP, UFOs, it could be Chinese drones or whatever, but they're seeing something under the water with their new sonars and stuff.
Yep.
There's USOs that are coming and going in and out of that water, moving at high rates of speed under their ships, and they don't know what to do with that. And that would explain, the Navy's involvement. I think that's what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I think it was NOAA that actually did come out. I believe it was today or yesterday that they said somebody reported, he's a retired NOAA folk who said, or no, I think actually he's still working. But he said he was in a submarine and he saw these
what
beings.
They call them like fast movers or something.
Yes, something like that. And then I remember hearing about the Russian story where the Russian divers in that big lake that they have out there, that they tried to actually capture one, but they were sent back up to the surface so fast that some of them died from the bends.
Rapid
that Soviet site. Yeah, right. So, but I don't know if I believe that they were sent up so fast, or if really something scared the crap out of them so bad that they swam to the surfaces. That they try to get up as fast as they could. But out of 7 divers, I think half of them died. So it must have been something terrifying and humongous to be down there. But they said they saw big beings with suits on and a big, like glass dome over their head. And then NOAA, this NOAA guy, or not, maybe a few of them, said that they saw some kind of humanoid figures under the sea, and this was just in the news just recently. So,
there's a lot. There's a lot going on, and as our technology improves, we're gonna learn more and more.
Yeah, sure are.
So it's a great time for science. I mean, we're going into territories to try to figure out new ways to, examine and investigate these things. And right now we got the technology, but I don't know if we necessarily have the people with the right mindset to come up with how are we going to test these hypotheses.
Exactly. I just recently read that, of course, I'm trying to read more and more about this, see what's going on in the news lately. I'm just saying I was more interested in seeing how the reaction to the program was, and I'm just so happy and relieved that it was positive. But I picked up other UFO stories, and one of which was the one where NASA is actually going to be they're going to develop a UFO study group of scientists and seriously look to see if we're being visited. So I hope NASA would be, I know there's a lot of stories about NASA covering things, but I would like to, I would like to see NASA actually come out with something.
See, I think they need to think of this backwards. Instead of looking out and then coming here to Earth, we need to start what's here.
Right.
Let's start here on Earth and then go from Earth outward.
Exactly.
Because you're looking at such a huge amount of space out in the universe and trying to find a microscopic needle in a haystack, where we got all of these people reporting these objects. Let's start there.
Right.
Then we can find out what's going on, because maybe these things are not visiting from somewhere else and they just have the technology to hide from us, go in deep oceans, deep lakes, leave the planet, go to the moon, go to other planets for resources that they need, and then come back here and down underground, down in their water base, whatever. Right. And sometimes we interact with them and sometimes we don't. But I think we should start here first. And, if NASA wants to do that, I think NASA and NOAA and the Navy should get together and put the brain trust together and be like, okay,
be open about it too.
And be open. Yes, because people have gone crazy with their sightings and what they've seen and then how they've been treated. People have literally been put in mental asylums and given drugs and, you're delusional, you're schizophrenic. No.
Yeah.
I don't buy that unless, you got a real, if you've really investigated it, but, that's kind of my stance on it right now anyways.
We're following the same wavelengths here, it sounds like. Because I'm glad somebody else is thinking the same lines as I am now. It sure made a believer out of me now, so many people are so interested in this. So sure, I would love to to continue investigating this. So, but thank you so much. I'd love to meet you. So I'll let you know when when I come up to Michigan, and I do a lot. So
yeah.
By the way, Jack, and I know that you're inundated with friend requests. I did send you one. Please do not put me into the acquaintance group.
Okay, I will definitely. I'll find you in there's probably 200 of them right now, but I'll find you guys now that I met you and I know you and know what you're all about.
Just look for the hyphenated name, as Wayne would tell people.
Okay, all right. I'll do it. I'll do it right away.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jack. I thought this would be a great interview and conversation, and when we were able to get this set up, and I'm glad I wasn't wrong. This has probably been one of the best nights to have an interview and talk with you, and so many things in common, and just amazing stuff. And what happened to basically both of our experiences where you were actually able to have a scientific
I got to hear
tool.
more about what you saw. I'd be very interested.
For sure.
Yeah,
hearing more about that. That's just I don't think I've ever really met anybody that actually experienced something like that, So
why a triangle?
Right. Yeah. And why Michigan? Why is Michigan? I've noticed that Michigan seems to be seeing the similar type UFOs. Yes. Have you noticed that too?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So something's going on in the lakes there.
Yeah. It's either, definitely. It seems like it's orbs, triangles, or some type of a saucer, like what was being reported in 94
right.
On the west side of the state. It seems to be, that seems to be the main thing that we're hearing. So
yeah. And you're right. We need to start doing some detecting underneath the lakes, and looking for stuff,
All right. Well, Jack, you know what? We should probably let you go. And I know you're a night owl, but we're up in about 6 hours for school. So
crap. Oh, that's right. You are. Yeah.
So we want to thank you once again. And anytime you want to come back on and talk about anything you've discovered, or when you get that paper written, if you want to come on and talk about it, that would be amazing.
And that's when I really want to get out there and go to some UFO conference and say this is, because then I finally have people that can read and see the radar and how it works, and can't be like having doubts about me not understanding how the radar works and other so basically it's going to be a scientific paper where I say what it wasn't, and so what's left,
And once again, I do want to reiterate that in 1994, the National Weather Service was not equipped or had any kind of protocols or anything to deal with something like this. So don't hold it, people out there, don't hold this against them. Don't hold it against, the middle manager, Leo, and even his, the boss's boss kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
They had no idea how to deal with this.
No, they didn't. Yeah.
So
I know.
I just want to put that out there.
I had a very good career with the National Weather Service. The Weather Service was good. They, to me, during the UFO, had a wonderful career. And so just pretty much say they didn't want to be the UFO reporting center, and they really didn't know how to handle this, something like this. Yeah. And they were protecting me. I could see it now. I was mad then, but I could see they were trying to just protect me and my career. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was fun. I had a great time. Thank you. It's nice meeting you.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you. And everybody, we will be right back. Well, I guess we've officially became the escalator that goes down the rabbit hole, because that was a long interview and just full of information.
Very slowly. But what a great conversation, and just still so many open endings to, talking to other people from the same occurrence on March 8th in 94.
Yeah. And here's the thing. And I put my speculation as to what I think these things are doing with the water, why it's kind of March. It's very cold. Most of the lake is frozen. They want that cold, fresh water for whatever their power plants are, for cooling or whatever. Maybe they're breaking apart the oxygen and hydrogen to use for fuel, but it has to be cold, clean, fresh water. I don't know. I'm just speculating.
Again, the conspiracy theories that can come out of this.
Well, it's not a conspiracy theory.
We know that it's fresh water, but as far as why it's
speculation.
That mile tall waterfall with the water being drawn up into it.
But this was a deep dive, and no pun intended, but what a deep dive into the inner workings of what happened on March 8th, 1994. And as you heard Jack and I talking, we're going to try to get together and kind of start correlating the one side of the state at different days and years to this event. And if you really start to think about this, the craft that were being reported in Michigan throughout March in 1966, if you look at those descriptions and the drawings that the police officers did in the Ann Arbor News, they look very similar and they sound very similar in their behavior. And I think all of these things are absolutely related, and it's to do with the lakes, and it has to do with their power plants. And that's where I'm at. I think we need to connect all the dots here.
Well,
and I
now,
think we're close.
After retiring, he's got that time to dig into the observations and the witness accounts of 94 that he's been waiting to.
Well, like he said, he found his new calling, and I can't agree more. We need a scientific-minded person with a background in aviation, with a background in radars, in weather, these aerial phenomenon that happen, or I should say weather phenomenon that happen. He's one of the perfect guys to put on this kind of a mission. And I'll tell you, when he was talking about who's been going to his LinkedIn page, the U.S. Department of Navy, oceanographers, NOAA, so something's brewing and something's going on. Now, for one last thing I wanted to say is I know there's been rumblings and things now that the government's starting to backpedal on the TikTok and the Go Fast and the gimbal videos that those Navy pilots were saying, they couldn't see them unless they were on infrared. Now they're saying those were drones of some kind, and they didn't want people to know that we knew they were drones and all of this stuff. So now we're going to have two camps. We're going to have one camp saying that the Navy and the intelligence programs are going to be they're covering it up, that they are UFOs, but they're just going to say they're drones, kind of like weather balloon kind of a situation, right? Or you're going to have the other camp that's like, see, I told you they were drones. This has all been a big hoax from the beginning. I don't know what to believe with any of that stuff or what to think. But with this situation here at home in Michigan, totally different. Totally different. Radar, eyewitness accounts, police officers, and 2 anonymous pilots that came forward to Michael Walsh when he was writing that article about this. And they said they saw the long cylindrical object flying in front of them, and then it broke off to the right and disappeared. It moved so fast. We did not have any kind of craft in 1994 that could pull that off. We were just really getting into the stealth technology.
Well, there's going to be a lot more said next Saturday on StreamYard.
Absolutely. Make sure you join us for our live stream where we're going to discuss this with a panel of people that I'm not going to release just yet, but it will be at 8 p.m. Eastern on our YouTube channel. Come check us out and join in the discussion. It's an awesome place to have a interactive discussion with fans of the show and anybody else that wants to join along. And who knows, we might have a couple celebrities joining us. I'm just saying.
Oh, you never know.
All right, everybody. With that little teaser, this has been a long one. This was a deep dive. I hope to have more of these. We hope to have Mr. Bushong back on soon. Talk about more things as he gets out there and talks and begins his investigations and the work that hopefully we can collaborate on together. But with that being said, everybody, have a good night.
Have a great night, everyone.
And remember, especially in March, keep those eyes to that sky.
You have been listening to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. You can reach us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at mi_UFO and join our Facebook group by searching for Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters. So until next time.